Welcome to Norwich City Council Sustainable Development Panel. It's Tuesday, the 13th of January 2026. Before we start, just some housekeeping. My name is Ian Stuteley. I'm the chair this afternoon, and we have no plans for an alarm. So if there is a fire alarm, please evacuate City Hall, going down the main staircase and out to the War Memorial in front of the building. Please would speakers use their microphone at all times and speak directly into the microphone. Please use the please mute microphones when not speaking. The meeting is being live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. Members of the committee and officers will introduce themselves, starting from my left, please, going around the room.
Councillor Emma Hampton.
Councillor Hannah Höchner.
Councillor Richard Laws.
Judith Lubbock.
Preet Padder.
Councillor Gary Champion.
Thank you.
Apologies for lateness.
Okay.
Sarah Ashurst, Head of Planning and Regulatory Services.
Naya Desoa, Planning Officer.
The Senior Planner.
Mike Burrell, Greater Norwich Planning Policy Manager.
Leonie Bowitt, Senior Committee Officer.
Thank you, and welcome to all. Can I have apologies, please, if there are any?
No apologies, Chair.
And declarations of interest, please. Councillor Laws.
As I usually do, there are references in the papers to student accommodation, including PPSA and HMO at one point, page 107 and there's various page references I could quote, but as a student landlord myself, I always just mention that. I don't think I'm precluded from speaking or voting or anything. I don't think this is the nature of the papers or the committee.
Thank you. Nothing's been identified as okay, so you can remain for that item.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we have the minutes of two previous meetings, Tuesday the 9th of September and Tuesday the 4th of September. Tuesday the 9th of September was included in the report, and then 4th of November was circulated later. Are there any questions on, first of all, September's minutes, please? Questions or comments? No? Okay, and also on Tuesday 4th of November. The last meeting. From that, okay, so nothing there. And yeah, are we? Oh yes. Do we vote on each individually? Okay, so let's vote on those. Is everyone content that they are accurate and complete? Thank you. Yeah, that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so we have the first item. Thank you. Oh yes, item number 4 is the annual monitoring report 2023-24, and Naya will introduce that one for us, please.
Sorry, I'm here to present the annual monitoring report data collection that was done for 2023-2024, and I will just provide an overview on the reporting from the joint core strategy and the development management policies for Norwich. And the reporting is for 2023-2024, and we are discussing this today because of the reporting being delayed because of resource availability. The report itself mostly references to the indicators for the joint core strategy, but we know that the GNLP was adopted in March 2024, so there is an overlap in the monitoring period with the 2023-2024 mostly being JCS and some GNLP monitoring being reported. And we'll be able to give a full monitoring report for the GNLP in the next annual reporting for 2024-2025, which we are currently working on, and this will be presented to you in the next couple of months. So I will start off with going over some of the key highlights from the annual monitoring for 2023-2024. Starting off with some of the indicators which are monitored under the JCS, the Joint Cost Strategy. Starting off with the environmental indicators, the data collected for 2022-2023, and this one is specifically to 2022-2023 because this is government reported data and they are reporting it a year behind. So this one is not 2023-2024, but 2022-2023. And the CO2 emissions data shows that overall emissions have decreased in all of the Greater Norwich authorities. And when you look at the specific indicators which we monitor, we see that there has been some increases and decreases through the monitoring. We look at industrial sector, commercial sector, domestic, as well as transport. And the data which we've collected from the government shows that emissions have decreased in both transport and commercial sectors. In South Norfolk and Broadland as well, the emissions are stable. But in Norwich, there has been emissions have increased in most of the sectors, with the exception of domestic sector. And also we looked at some of the air pollution data. So pollution levels in most areas of Greater Norwich are below the annual mean recommendation of 40 micrograms per cubic meter. And in Norwich, we've got air quality that is monitored at several locations in the air quality monitoring area, as well as outside of the air quality monitoring area. And the data show that there had been some increases and decreases at various locations, but overall air pollution remains at acceptable levels, and there continues to be within acceptable levels. And in terms of renewable energy provision, the annual monitoring for 2023-2024 indicated that there continues to be increased provision of renewable energy within Greater Norwich, especially with solar energy. We've had applications for solar panels on residential premises as well as commercial premises, and they make quite a significant contribution to the solar energy provision in Greater Norwich. There's been a few cases which are quite notable and worth highlighting. Within Norwich, we've had solar panels installed on Chantry Place. We had Morrison Supermarket, they've got solar panels, and we've got residential developments like Argyle Street, which also includes solar panels. So there is provision for solar energy in the city and Greater Norwich in all. Norwich as a whole approved a total of 1,295 solar panels, and also we had 14 air source heat pumps on a number of schemes. And we've also been monitoring waste, and the data we have showed that the amount of waste that is composted around Greater Norwich has increased, and there has been some slight decrease in the waste that is recycled. But overall, this is potentially due to the fact that people are kind of making more environmental friendly practices, so that reduces the waste that needs to be recycled, reducing those rates. As part of the monitoring, we've also done some data collection looking at housing delivery. So looking at housing completions across the whole of Greater Norwich, there was a total of 2,020 houses which were completed in 2023-2024. And from this figure, there was 23% on brownfield sites. Overall, this data shows that there is quite a strong bounce back from like pre-pandemic levels of delivery that we're having. In Norwich itself, we had 246 houses completed, and this is an increase from the previous year, so indicating there is a slowdown in delivery, but there is some progress as nutrient neutrality kind of continues to have an impact on the delivery. Looking at an overview of delivery during the plan period of the JCS. The JCS plan period was from 2008 to 2024. And during that period, there was 28,000 houses, over 28,000 houses were delivered, which is 76% of what the housing target was for the JCS. But if you were to kind of look at the figures starting from when JCS was adopted, which was in 2011, you see that there was delivery of over 23,000 houses. And this is like a 90% of what the JCS target is. Looking at the figures from 2011, so overall housing delivery for the JCS plan period was not too far off from the overall target of the JCS. And in terms of affordable housing, in Greater Norwich, we had 800 affordable houses delivered in the monitoring period, and this is above the annual target of 675. Majority of this was delivered in South Norfolk and Broadland. In Norwich, we delivered 83 affordable houses, and this was 34% of the housing completions we had during this period. The 83 affordable houses delivered in Norwich represents the third highest delivery of affordable houses since 2014, which is quite positive. And so whilst talking about housing, we have published a new housing land supply assessment. This was carried out for the whole of Greater Norwich. The assessment itself covered a 5-year period from April 2024 to March 2030. The housing land supply assessment highlighted the fact that we do not have a 5-year housing land supply in Greater Norwich. And since April 2025, the position has been a housing land supply of 4.85. So we're just short of the 5-year requirement. Overall, this has some impact on decision making, as the presumption in favour of sustainable development is therefore applied when you're making decisions on planning applications. Looking at the economic indicators from the JCS, starting off with retail, vacancy levels for Norwich City Centre have reduced to 12.6%, although we are still having vacancy rates that are above the pre-pandemic levels when the rates were below 6%. We continue to see some decline in retail floor space due to changes to the use class order, giving premises more flexibility to change from retail to other uses. On the other hand, we continue to see an increase in other uses that are not retail, which is kind of creating a more diverse city centre. And this change to an increase in more non-retail uses has had some knock-on effect of reducing the retail frontage zones in the city, but only very minor effect. And in terms of offices, office floor space, there was some loss of office floor space in the city with 16,224 square meters lost, but most of it, this is due to Marsh building being demolished. And although there was some office space lost in Norwich, we had some permissions for small and medium-sized office floor spaces for businesses in Norwich. And in Broadland, the South Norfolk, they are continuing to see an increase in office floor space due to permissions at Imperial Park, which is at the airport, as well as development at Broadway Enterprise Park. And similarly with South Norfolk, they've had some gains in office floor space with development at the Research Park. An overview in terms of just employment. Overall, Greater Norwich authorities employment rate is above the national average, and there's been an increase of 1,400 jobs since 2021-2022. That's the latest data available. And although this is an increase below the level expected in the JCS, it is kind of consistent with the national trend. So now I'm going to focus slightly more on the DM policies, looking at the indicators specifically for Norwich, which mentioning stuff which I haven't already mentioned. So the DM indicators, DM2, which relates to standards of developments. The data we've collected showed that we've only had a few applications refused for not meeting design standards, which translate to several permissions being refused. And we had the refusal at Carroll Works. So you see that in the data we have, it's almost 2,000 houses were refused on the grounds of not complying with DM2. And we've also had several applications which were refused due to not complying with space standards. There's also been some positives with DM10 relating to telecommunications. We've had 22 applications approved for telecoms in the city. And this is the biggest we've had since the monitoring period. And I think some of this is being driven by increased demand from people that are working from home, and just digitization means that there's increased demand on the network, which is why we're having increased applications being submitted. Housing permissions, we granted permission for 1,149 dwellings in Norwich. So the Anglia Square makes the biggest contribution to this, and also the numbers are being impacted by neutrality, which is having an impact on the housing permissions we are able to issue at the moment. Looking at the indicators for the city centre uses, the data we had kind of showed that we continue to see a lot of permissions that are delivered in the defined city centres, which is consistent with what the local plan requires, with only very few developments for commercial that are outside of the defined centres. Floor space totaling 14,679 square meters was permitted for town centre uses, and the approval of Anglia Square. We had also quite a big contribution to this because Anglia Square is classed as a district centre. And also looking at office floor space permitted in the city, with a total of 1,518 square meters of office floor space approved. Most of this floor space is outside of employment areas. However, there were some permissions within the office development priority area. again, it's also worth highlighting for that the changes to the use class order also kind of has an impact on what needs permission and what doesn't. So not everything needs to come through planning. And then looking at community facilities, the data we have shows that there's been a slight decline in the amount of floor space approved for community facilities. Anglia Square's approval made quite a big contribution to the community floor space approved, with 697 square meters being delegated for community uses. And also looking at parking rates in the city centre, with Anglia Square being developed, several car parks had to close. So this contributed to there being a reduction in the amount of car parking spaces in the city centre. We had 9,577 car parking spaces available. Well, overall, this is still consistent with the local plan, which limits parking spaces to 10,000 in the city centre areas. So just in closing, so this was just an overview of some of the key data sets that came out of the annual monitoring for 23-24. And the recommendation was just to make members aware of the content of the annual monitoring for 2023-2024. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So this it's quite a big report, about 320 pages. So I assume everyone's read it from cover to cover. Are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Hockner first, please.
Oh, thank you, and sorry for leaving this on. My first question is on page 14.29, which mentions the proposed that there'll be new national development management policies, and it says it is understood that first details of what the national development management policies might include will be published in December 2025. So I was wondering whether there were any updates on that.
They have been published, but not exactly as we expected. They now form part of the National Planning Policy Framework, and they're now termed decision-making policies. So the National Planning Policy Framework is divided into two main sections. One is for plan making. So when we review the Greater Norwich Local Plan, we'll have to follow that approach. And then in line with the government's intention to have less repetition in local plans, or very limited repetition in local plans of development management policies, those policies are largely in the National Planning Policy Framework. So previously, in the legislation that was introduced, that came in through the previous government, there had been some discussion of having them as actually statutory development management policies. The government decided against this, but is keeping tabs on how effective they are, and may go back to producing them statutorily, but for now they're part of national policy. They're really important to the next stage of what we do. So we, in reviewing the Greater Norwich Local Plan, we're going to have to consider what development management policies we have in Norwich and in Broadland, South Norfolk, which ones have a really local flavour that's important to retain, and which are covered by the national policies we don't need to retain. If we're going to retain them, we'll need to put them in the Greater Norwich Local Plan review. You can't have a separate development management policies plan now. So it's all change. New system is coming in.
Okay, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, if you don't mind, just because it's very technical. How did you gauge the implications of that? Is it making it easier to respond to local circumstances? Is this a positive development or not?
I'd say it's a positive development in that local plans won't have to include national policies in anymore. So that really streamlines them, but it will be really important we identify what are our local policy needs, where we do need to have a local policy. So that's a piece of work that, and Charlotte, you already did this to a certain extent previously, didn't you, when we in deciding which policies to save from the development management plan up to now, we have identified those which are still really important, were adopted 10 years ago. We'll have to do some more work on that, looking at national planning policy framework and see which we still need to save, or if we're going, well, if we're going to save them, we need to update them because they're 10 years old now. So I think watch the space on what's going to happen. But personally, I think it's very good that these have been introduced.
Just members might have seen the email that I sent earlier today. There is a webinar by the Planning Advisory Service on the National Planning Policy Framework, which I think addresses some of these things. So look out for the email. That it's free to attend, and my understanding is they do record or at least provide the slides after the meeting on the website. So yeah, it's free to sign up. It's just an online webinar for councillors on the NPPF.
That sounds great. I was strongly urge you to sign up to that, because normally the Planning Advisory Service, yeah, normally they're very good. They're trained.
Okay, thank you. That's noted. Any other questions from councillors? I saw Councillor Champion first, and then Councillor Laws.
Well, thank you for giving me more papers than I can possibly read. But it was very interesting. I guess my question is in relation to recycling. Quite close to the beginning on page 28, it talks about the percentage of household waste that is recycled, and it categorizes that as green. Sorry, as red, as opposed to most things which are green. I just wondered if you could elaborate on why that is and what we're doing.
So we get those figures from Norfolk County Council, from the Waste Partnership, and when we had a discussion about why it was categorised as red for Norwich, I think actually not just for Norwich, it might be across the board. Yeah, across the board. We're obviously, Naya's already spoken about people making more environmentally friendly choices about what they choose to buy, and therefore what it becomes waste, but also the standard of what can be recycled has increased. So it's actually increased the amount of material that is being rejected from recycling. And the county council have said they're going to continue to work with local authorities on how we can actually improve those recycling rates, because we're getting this high level of material rejection at the moment. So it's being monitored, and the county council want to work with the authorities to kind of improve that figure.
Okay, thank you. So I think there's a point on that, and also Councillor Hampton afterwards. Councillor Hartnett, please.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand whether recycling rates go down because bins are contaminated and then they go collectively into the general waste. Is it a contamination problem? Because I guess then there would be an element of a comm strategy to residents to make it clearer that to them where to put what.
Yeah, so I don't know whether it's to do with the actual standard of material in terms of the types of material that can now be accepted for recycling for certain end products, or whether it's due to contamination. But I mean, we can have a discussion with County Council and confirm that and come back to you if you'd like to know.
Okay, so Councillor Hampton, would you like to add to that now? And also I saw Sarah as well. Would it be helpful, Sarah, if you go first?
It was just on the recycling matter. Obviously, we could have a conversation with our colleagues who run our waste contract to ascertain exactly why it is that our recycling rates are going down, and then feed that back to members outside of this meeting, if that would be helpful. But as I understand it, there's been legal changes around packaging standards of what can and cannot be recycled, which means that less of what you put in your bin needs to be recycled, possibly because it's more eco-friendly in the first place. But we will investigate that and get back to members of the panel outside of this meeting, if that's helpful.
Yep, thank you. That'd be useful data. Councillor Hampton, please.
I think some of what I would have commented on that has been said about the standards changes, but I'm presuming going forward we'll be expecting to see improvements as some of the simpler recycling reforms come through, especially in Broadland and South Norfolk, who are already a bit behind on what and how they recycle. So I know this is obviously 23-24, but we would expect to see improvements naturally, I suppose, going forward.
Thank you. I understand other areas don't have food waste, for example, collections for food waste. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I saw Councillor Laws, but also Councillor Lubbock. Do you have a question that's related to what we were just talking about? Yeah.
It was just the idea that the Norfolk County Council is speaking to the recycling companies, and I think it needs to be some conversation perhaps with the people who throw the waste away. So at an earlier date, you know, if there is contamination, then we need to know what is the contamination is occurring, and then have a communication with the residents, because, you know, we all want to feel we're doing our bit, and obviously, you know, there is some people throwing stuff away that is messing it up for everybody else, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the whole story, but I'm sure that that's part of it. And we don't hear much. I mean, we used to, when we started with these initiatives, you know, oh, this is the amount and you're doing well and just check on this and don't do that. But we don't have any communication, I feel now. It's just we feel we're all doing something good, but in fact, we're not. And we need to get that sort of feel-good factor back, that it is actually, we are doing the right thing. I mean, I go to a place where I take all my single-use plastics, and do other people do that, or do they just put it in their ordinary bin? And so a lot of stuff that, you know, things are changing, obviously, and we need to know about it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have... we don't have single-use plastic collections, but I believe it is proposed, isn't it, to bring that forward, perhaps at a national level, and hopefully at a local level.
Very thing that's thrown into recycling.
Yeah, so yeah, plastic packaging, soft plastics, for example. And I think actually, as councillors, we get a lot of inquiries from people not really knowing what they can and can't recycle. So perhaps some comms, some notes to take back from officers to our comms department about that. Okay, so I'm going to go into Councillor Laws, unless Councillor Champion, it's on the same.
It is on the same topic. Anecdotally, I've observed that a significant amount of houses in Norwich don't put out a food waste bin. When we're discussing climate change in relation to recycling, I can only assume that actually one of the prominent factors there is about food recycling, and that a lot of the contamination would be about food going into the other bins. Do we have any idea how many, when we speak to our recycling, you know, the crew who pick up all the food waste, do we ever get any data back about how many people are or aren't using food waste? Because it strikes me that if we are going to do an initiative and we want to tackle this in relation to climate change, I should have said that in my initial statement, but it was, but yeah, that would be my contribution, we're all giving helpful suggestions, which you don't want.
Okay, thank you. We do know that, especially with communal bins, there's a lot of contamination, which means that bins are not collected in good time. So that it is a problem and costly. Okay, Councillor Laws, please, and another.
So a new point now. We're moving on from.
Yes, unless anyone wants to follow up on that. No, I don't think so. So go ahead.
Thanks again for the reports. Very comprehensive. Just a couple of points related to transport and the environment and safety. I noticed that on page 34, there's again, we're red on increase in, or presumably an increase, or to make progress on deaths from road accidents. I don't know if there's any further analysis been done, but on page 37, in terms of CO2 reductions, transport in Norwich is showing, if you like, an upward trend in terms of emissions. I don't know. I would hope there's no connection between the two, but are there any sort of general comments about use of public transport, road safety, and reduction of carbon emissions that could be made?
So paragraph, it's in the appendices underneath table 010.2, which has the number of people killed or seriously injured in the road traffic accidents. It goes into a bit more detail about the breakdown, about whether they were fatal or seriously injured outcomes. So in Norwich, also, although we've seen an increase from 52 accidents up to 62, which has resulted in the red RAG rating, in Norwich, that breaks down as 2 fatal injury collisions and 60 serious injury collisions, which compared to Broadland and South Norfolk, they've had higher numbers of fatal injury collisions compared to Norwich. And the lower rates of the fatal injury collisions in Norwich, it says in that paragraph, is kind of likely to be due to kind of speed restrictions in the city, obviously not having country roads and things like that. Could you repeat your second point about general transport things?
Yes, I was about. Thanks for that. So could you just give me the page reference for the statistics you've just quoted?
Page 90.
Page 90. Yeah, thank you. The other point was about CO2 emissions. I'm looking at page 37 for Dorridge specifically. It's showing red on the RAG status. I
think off the top of my head, until we just find that, I believe that we've got a red rating for industrial and commercial and transport, but green for domestic emissions. Is that correct, Naya? Yeah.
Yeah.
So so there has been an increase, although I would say that it's been a very minor increase. So we've gone up by 0.1 of the measure in each of those areas. So I haven't got to hand the reasons why that might be at this stage, but we can have a look into that and get back to you outside of this meeting if that's helpful.
I think it might be very difficult with that level of specificity to identify really what has caused that. The overall trend is downwards, but there's likely to be some sort of not constant downward travel. So we can certainly look into it, but I would be surprised if we're able to identify a specific reason, but we can do so. We can make an effort.
Thank you. It's a marginal increase, isn't it, year on year? I think Councillor Hockman's got a point related to the first one of Councillor Laws's question. So
Yeah,
please do that. And then I've got another one on the second point. So go ahead.
I was wondering whether we had data on who was involved in these road accidents, whether that's cyclists, pedestrians, or motorists, because I think that would be important to know, to gauge for whom roads are dangerous.
We'll have to go back and double check the data set, because I don't know off the top of my head, but we'll check the data set.
So just for, I missed that. Are you asking?
I asked who was injured and killed, whether these pedestrians, cyclists, or motorists.
Breakdown of whether it was passengers, pedestrians, or drivers. So, okay, thank you. And my follow-up to the other part of the question on transport and the emissions. We've had a investment, because this is quite old data, isn't it? We've had the introduction of the electric buses since this data was collected, or perhaps even during the period or after, which I hope, and I guess we all hope, will make a difference to these figures. So on that and others, what transport or air quality indicators should members expect to see an improvement on in the coming years and the next report?
Yeah, Sarah might be able to tell us when this happens, but there's an annual report on the air quality management area.
Yeah, there's an annual report which is published in June each year, and it has showed quite a significant positive impact as a result of the electric buses. So we're hoping that that kind of continues. Obviously, the electric buses have been introduced, but we've also had that kind of rise in transport with people coming kind of back into the city following COVID as well. So, but it is definitely a positive trend that we're seeing in terms of clean air across the city.
Okay, thank you. It'd be interesting as a follow-up to that to see the latest figures for bus usage, because obviously putting electric buses will reduce the emissions, but if we're just transporting buses through the city that are electric with nobody on them, it's and increasing under traffic, then it's probably pointless. So it'd be good to get some data if there is any available. Please.
Can I just say that bus usage has gone up, and also the provision of buses have gone up because there's been this bus BSIP money coming into the county from the government, yeah, and so they have been able to subsidise more services. And unfortunately, a lot of the services have been very successful coming in from North Norfolk, but you won't see an electric bus there at all. And so, you know, Sanders coaches are doing a fantastic job bringing people in from North Norfolk, but the diesel is awful.
Yes.
And when you get so many stopping on Castle Meadow, it's no wonder that the, the monitoring records that there is an increase. So I think it's difficult, really. And the buses, there's more buses, they wait there perhaps longer. And it's terrible walking through there sometimes because it's like a bus station. And,
yeah, and you're referring to idling as well, presumably.
Sorry?
Idling. Buses idling.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think, it's a bit of behaviour, but it is also that these smaller bus companies can't afford to invest at the moment, and yet they are being very successful and putting on more and more trips. And but I think that could, be the reason why we do have this slight increase, because there has been an increase in the number of buses that are being on our streets.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to see some further analysis of this. I don't know if other members would like to. I can see nodding. Yeah, Councillor Hockner, please. Yeah, follow up.
I think is it the air quality annual report that has recent data on it? Yeah. What I wanted to highlight is, and I think it's more a comment than a question, is that the guidelines that we measure against are, yes, the legal guidelines in the UK, but they're multiple times higher than the WHO recommended limits for air quality. It's considered safe for human health. So I'm just kind of a bit concerned that we're celebrating this progress when it's still exceeding the WHO limit by, 4 times. And yeah, just related to Councillor Labbock's point around idling, and I know, nitrogen dioxide being particularly high around Castle Meadow. Have they ever been, is there any policy around engine idling, any guidance for bus drivers, any communications campaign around that has tried to address that?
I think in our role at the moment as a district authority, we wouldn't be able to control that. Obviously, things may change in the future.
Okay, thank you. Don't we have a policy in the city, an idling policy, which is enforceable?
Don't believe so.
Okay, that's something that we need, perhaps. Yes. Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this report, please? Councillor Laws again, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on page 73 this time, just out of interest. So this is about young people who are not in education, employment or training, and I see that South Norfolk comes out quite a bit better than Broadland and Norwich. I just wonder if there's any sort of analysis done to whether we can learn from South Norfolk or why that is.
So this is one of the wider contextual indicators really that kind of comes alongside a local plan. So obviously the local plans themselves have a certain remit with what they can influence and control. And getting young people into educational training is indirectly related to planning about, you know, where you provide those places for people to go. So it's kind of a wider contextual indicator that we just kind of give for some extra overview. We don't have any information locally at Norwich about why that's happening, but we can try and find some. And I know that there's been a lot of kind of press and national research on the levels of young people in education and training as well. So maybe we can bring some information back to members as well about that too.
If you have time, that'd be great. Yeah.
As it happens in the Greater Norwich Local Plan team, we had an officer starting yesterday in our digitalisation who previously worked at County Hall on NEAT. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to ask Lizzie, and she'll be able to point us in the right direction to find an answer. So we'll get back to you on that.
Thank you.
That is percentage of population related as well. So density of population differences could also have an influencing factor on that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Padder, please.
Yeah, just to that point, actually, Councillor Laws, I think one of my bugbears is that, you know, I think East Anglia generally doesn't have the amount of good quality jobs that it really does need. And I see there are opportunities with the kind of blue economy, green economy, but I think at the pace that those opportunities are coming through is kind of lagging behind the kind of growth ambitions. And so there's a bigger question around that generally, I think, that needs addressing more nationally. Now to my question is on page 15, DM20, I was wondering if you could give a bit more context behind the first sentence where it says, with the exception of Chantry Place, the city centre is seeing a gradual increase in the percentage of non-retail uses. And then the sentence, this can be attributed to amendments to the town and country planning order, which gives more flexibility. I think the reason for my question is that Norwich is, you know, it's a rural city and it really depends on its independent sector. So I was wondering whether there's more context behind the increase in a decline in retail use and an increase in non-retail use. For example, the NICs, cost of living, real living wage, all of those things could be factors attributed towards, you know, the kind of diversity in non-retail uses. So I was wondering if, you know, there's more to it than, you know, the changes to the town and country planning order.
I think the changes to national policy reflect the changes in the economy that are not just affecting Norwich, they're affecting the whole country, probably the whole continent, I'd imagine, where we're moving away from town centres are not just retail centres anymore. They're places where people, to encourage people to come into town centres, you have to broaden your offer. And in Norwich, we've got a good offer in Chantry Place, in the lanes and so on, where we have very much retail focused. But other parts of the city centre have been changing and adapting. So there's more things like leisure uses, for example, in the Castle Quarter. That I think it reflects a national change. So that's what that refers to there. The next item on the agenda, we're going to go into a bit more detail about the retail monitor. But I would say that's the main reason. And what the retail monitor shows us is, and I'll go into more detail shortly, is that compared to most other places, Norwich is doing fairly well, quite well, but everywhere is experiencing retail change. If we were to try, if the government were to try, if we were to try to stick to the policies we had 15 years ago, it simply wouldn't be effective, and we'd have lots of empty shops that weren't being used for other positive uses.
There's also size implications for the general permitted development order changes that you referred to in that paragraph. allows for retail uses to change non-retail uses without planning permission, but only up to a certain size limit. So obviously smaller premises can change without needing planning permission, but larger premises can't. So that also might be influencing which areas of the city that we're seeing change to non-retail uses without permission, and those that are being retained for retail use as well.
Okay, thank you. We'll draw this item to a close shortly, so we'll just have a couple more questions if there are any. Councillor Lubbock.
Yeah, firstly, just a sort of general comment that I think this monitoring report does show the detrimental impact that the nutrient neutrality has had on the city over since March 22, and it's, you know, we're still feeling the effect. I mean, I don't know how far that is linked to the issue that we do not have a 5-year land supply, and you know, can we start thinking strategically if there's anything we can do to get back to the 5-year land supply, anything proactive that we can do to bring perhaps just a few sites back, that, you know, or just one of the sites that or a couple of sites that just they have got planning permission but they haven't built out, because it's so frustrating to see our officers at planning always say, well, there's nothing you can do to resist this application because we don't have a 5-year land supply.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I think it's been a very difficult journey we've been on since March 2022, and we continue to feel the effects of nutrient neutrality, but we are doing quite a bit kind of in the background to try and release permissions. We've obviously joined NEC as the joint venture, so developers now have access to credits that are provided through that. We are seeing permissions starting to kind of come through and be determined, and no pun intended, but it's a trickle, not a flood. It is costly on development, and you know, the viability situation in Norwich is really difficult. Putting nutrient neutrality and other policy requirements aside, a lot of sites simply are not viable to develop. So if you then pile all the policy compliant additional costs on top, you're in a very, very difficult position. So while sites may have planning permission, it's just not worth the developer's time building it out. We are looking at doing some specific viability work about the city in terms of supporting the Greater Norwich Local Plan moving forward, and we do have a number of applications that will be coming through planning committee soon, but they may represent very difficult decisions for committee members to make. I do strongly believe though that, you know, there are applications coming through which, if we are brave and we are bold, could be the signal to the rest of Norwich and the country that we are open for business. We're obviously doing a huge amount ourselves in terms of investing in Anglia Square, and kind of helping development get off the starting blocks ourselves, and our relationships with Homes England in terms of Anglia Square has been hugely beneficial, and we're also doing lots of work to put Norwich on the map, you know, just getting people out there, going to things like UK Reef. I sing about Norwich every time I see anybody related to planning or from MHCLG, so our name is getting out there, and I think all of that helps. We will continue to ride the journey. I do feel that there are big changes nationally on the horizon. So we've obviously recently had the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, and I'll be doing a training session for members on the implications of that in, I think it's middle of February, just to let you know about what's coming through that decision or through that legislation and secondary legislation, which will help both in terms of nutrient neutrality, but also potentially in terms of kind of getting decisions made and releasing things moving forward. So, you know, the journey's not over, it's still difficult, but we do need to take some brave decisions ourselves, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and I do firmly believe it is getting brighter.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I had a question that's related to that, so I'll try and put it into words without repeating, or without asking you to repeat some of what you just said. So how confident are you that the Greater Norwich Local Plan policies will increase delivery without weakening affordability, quality or environmental standards? And I guess a follow-up to that would be, what safeguards are in place to prevent speculative development or appeal-led decisions disproportionately affecting lower income communities?
I think kind of related to that question and the question of the 5-year land supply, it's almost less of an issue for Norwich. Most of the sites that we allocate and we see development coming forward on our brownfield sites. In terms of being forced down a decision route, most of those kind of non-allocated sites are sites that we probably would consider positive for redevelopment. What we then need to do is balance out that community impact and the environmental impact, etc., when we make those planning decisions. And as I say, the world of decisions at the moment is very difficult. The central government steer definitely is build, build, build. That is coming through in terms of some of the changes they're making in planning reforms. So, for example, one of them is that we would have to refer if we wanted to refuse planning applications over 150 dwellings. It would not be our decision if we were going to refuse that. It would go automatically to the Secretary of State. So it's a very different world that we're operating in. As I say, I think we're looking to get a lot of evidence around what we can do to deliver and ensure we, get the best for Norwich while delivering the numbers that we need. And that evidence will support the GNLP review. I don't know, Mike, if you want to say anything further.
Yeah, from conversations that we've been having recently, I think that we're doing well with Anglia Square, with East Norwich, with the larger sites, but we probably need some sort of policy mechanism to help bring forward these smaller brownfield sites, particularly in the city centre. Ones on King Street, for example. I saw an article in the paper about those recently. Maybe we can get government money. We can have some sort of hook in the GNLP review to try and get funding in for a group of smaller sites together, because that appears to be the problem at the moment. The lack of profitability in brownfield sites.
You're talking about clustering sites to improve viability.
Yeah. Well, not physically join them together, but put them in a package together. To try and get external funding.
Okay, thank you. I suppose I've got a quick follow-up to that as well. From a sustainable development point of view, do we have major concerns? Do officers, first of all, have major concerns about the planning and infrastructure bill? Because I know that some environmental groups certainly do. So I wondered if you could just comment on that or provide some reassurance.
I think from my perspective, it is the legislation now, so I wouldn't like to give an opinion on it. It's the framework we have to work to, and there will be further regulations. So
okay,
there we are.
I think that answers the question. Gary, Councillor Champion, please.
Thank you, Chair.
So it may be possible to deliver biodiversity net gain on protected sites. So that could include enhancement of existing conservation sites. So even if a site isn't in a SSSI that is being developed, you're not developing in the SSSI, but say a site can't deliver their biodiversity net gain on site, they therefore need to deliver it off site, whether they do that directly or they are buying credits from a habitat bank. That BNG can be delivered on protected biodiversity sites elsewhere. So that's where that's relevant. In terms of the drop in the favourable condition figures, obviously it says it's a national trend. We get that data from Natural England, so we're kind of beholden to what they monitor and what they can provide to us. that gives you some clarity. Did you want to follow up on that?
Just in relation to what you just said, would that mean maybe Mousehold Heath would receive biodiversity net gain money?
It could do. It depends on biodiversity net gain is quite complex to navigate in terms of how you secure where the biodiversity net gain is actually delivered. So obviously the simplest route is for somebody to just deliver it on their development site. If they want to deliver it off site, they might do it on a site they already own. Obviously Mousehold Heath, as an example, isn't owned by a private developer, so they wouldn't necessarily be delivering it there. They might have a piece of land somewhere else that they're going to deliver it on. But there is
Sorry, if I may just interrupt you. So just so they can't put it on a piece of land which they don't own.
They can, as a third option, is
Okay.
that they could basically buy credits from a habitat bank. Habitat bank would own a piece of land, and they would basically make the habitat enhancements or create the new habitat. You would get a certain number of biodiversity units as a result of that, and they can sell those to developers. So developers are effectively providing their biodiversity net gain through that route, but they are buying credits. Somebody else is doing the actual provision on a site.
Is there a bank of SSSI land in Norwich?
The registered sites in Norwich are all on, there is a government website which has all the registered biodiversity net gain sites, so you can type in Norwich and see. I'm not actually sure that we have any directly in Norwich at the moment. We might do. I'd have to double check, but you can go in and have a look at where they are.
So if we didn't, then that comment doesn't really link in with that section.
I think it's there as a context that it could do, that they are an opportunity, that is an option. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're registered as site at the moment, but that doesn't mean they couldn't be in future.
Okay, sorry, thank you. I was just one of those, when I see red, I go, oh, red. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can't see any other questions. I'll just, because we've done an hour on this, I'll just have one question. I had a few more, but I'll just stick to one, which is quite general. This is the final report on the joint course strategy, and there's some good stuff in it, but it does present a mixed picture. So officers in the report have expressed confidence that the Greater Norwich Local Plan will address many of these issues. So which specific indicators do officers expect to show measurable improvements in the next monitoring year as a result of the GNLP policies rather than external factors?
We will be able to tell you that in a few months when we bring the next monitoring report to members. So we're currently working on all the data collection for that, which will cover the GNLP period proper, because obviously we've only got a tiny little overlap in this actual report. And also just to say that the monitoring report is going to look a bit different for the next one, because we are fully aware that this is an enormous document and it's possibly not the most accessible thing for everybody to look at. So we're going to have a more of a data dashboard type thing that people can use. So it should be more accessible. We haven't finished the data collection and analysis for that next monitoring period yet, so we couldn't say to you exactly what is showing measurable improvement, but we will be able to do that when we bring that report to members.
Okay, just to follow up, do you have a sense that there are going to be improvements in certain areas?
I think there'll be improvements in green infrastructure. That's ongoing. Where through SIL spending, we are spending money on SIL improvements. And the one I really want to see, is the boardwalk between UEA and Eaton Village replaced. And that's one I really hope comes forward.
Okay, thank you. Demonstrating how important SIL money is. Okay, thank you. That brings that one to a close. So item number 5 is the Norwich City Centre Shopping and Town Centre Floor Space Monitor and Local and District Centres Monitor. And Mike, are you delivering this one? Yep, thank you.
Okay, I won't say a great deal in introduction. Just I have a few bullet points I'll just talk you through. Feel free to ask questions as I go along. So the surveys were undertaken autumn last year, They cover the city centre, which is divided down into different sections, district centres, for example, the one at Beaufort, and local centres. Now, I'll quickly go through what the findings are. The primary retail area, which is the core of the city centre, performed very well, seeing a reduction in vacant floor space and the number of vacant units. So this is compared to autumn 2024. We do this every year. The secondary retail, that's areas like the Norwich lanes and so on, experienced a significant fall in vacant available floor space, but at the same time a rise in all vacant floor space and units. So a more mixed picture there. Vacancy rates increased within large district centres, and we have two of these. These are at Riverside and the North City Centre, and in the rest of the city centre, which is areas like Cathedral Retail Park, which indicated that the shopping areas on the city centre's periphery were performing slightly less well. Now, it's important to note this was done in autumn last year. This is at the start of Anglia Square being knocked down. So obviously the retail vacancies in Anglia Square, they were entirely vacant. So that forms one part of the large district centre. So it explains that finding. In the local and district centres, they did increase slightly, but remained significantly lower than the overall city centre rates, and are relatively healthy. And this has been quite a long-term trend since I think it was about 15 years ago, planning policy changed to encourage small-scale supermarkets in place, lots of little sort of co-ops and so on in places like Coleman Road shops, and that's really helped over long term to strengthen those sort of more district and local centres. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit more in more detail about the city centre. Overall, given the circumstances, and this is the sort of thing I was talking about in response to your question earlier, the city centre is doing well. It's demonstrated that it remains relatively robust and is a thriving retail regional centre. Many years ago, when we used to do these reports, Norwich was one of the top centres nationally. It was in the top 5 at one point. Now it's still very strong regionally, but I think that reflected a time. It was when Castle Mall, as it was then, had opened, and Chapelfield had opened, and it was going through a real retail surge. It's now settled back more towards its natural place. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So whilst the number of vacant retail units has increased slightly over the last 12 months in the city centre, available vacant retail floor space has decreased and footfall levels are still good. So that's really important. There's a lot of people in the city centre. The business improvement district, the BID, they measure footfall and it's staying high. To maintain a thriving city centre, the council must identify ways to adapt and to attract investment given the potential challenges ahead. So there is a role for us. Things like the improvements on Hay Hill, we need more of a focus on making it an attractive place to spend time. Now I'm just going to do a little bit of comparison with other similar cities nationally. So if you look at figure 2, which is on page 343, that shows that Norwich is doing well compared to the national average. It sits within the left-hand side of the graph, which shows that more than half the cities surveyed have higher vacancy rates than Norwich. So that's a good sign. We're doing fairly well there. One of the reasons for Norwich's success is its very large catchment size. And there's a map, figure 1 on page 341. It shows that Norwich city centre's catchment covers much of Norfolk, parts of North Suffolk as well. We have a large area that we serve. This information comes from the Centre for Cities and was published in July 2025, and it highlights how our lack of rivals means that the catchment stretches over a large area. Furthermore, the Centre for Cities have also included a chart which ranks cities by population size and their catchment area, and that is figure 3. As can be seen in the chart, Norwich is ranked 35th in terms of its population, and I think the Centre for Cities would count the Norwich population as Norwich and Broadland. For some reason, they chose not to include those parts of South Norfolk that are clearly reliant on Norwich, but that's what they're measuring. So it ranks as 35th in terms of its population. It is ranked in 11th in terms of its catchment size. So things are still fairly good, although of course they have changed. And finally, just like to say that we have changed the presentation of this report in this iteration of the report. So if you have any views on how user-friendly it is and how else we might make it more user-friendly, please let us know. That's all.
Okay, again, thank you for the report and the presentation. I'll go again to questions. So this time I saw Councillor Laws first and then Councillor Hockner.
Actually, not so much a question, but just a comment, picking up your final comment. Yes, I did find the presentation of this report very useful with the graphics, particularly as you can more easily see the longer term trends. And perhaps I could gently suggest that might be considered a bit more for the previous report, the AMR, because it's hard to digest tables of figures. Always easier to look at a visual than digest tables of figures. But I'll leave that with you. But thanks, it's a very good report. Thank you.
Very good to hear that, because that was our intention. Charlotte just referred to the fact that the annual monitoring report will change. It will be a much more modern, up-to-date approach in the next one, because the Greater Norwich Local Plan was adopted in 2024. It was designed with that approach in mind. The Joint Cost Strategy was adopted in 2011, when that was just it wasn't something people were really thinking about at that time, but we've been left with the legacy of that up till now. So yes, we can do better in the future now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'd second that. I read this on in PDF version on my computer, and it was very easy to read. A little bit more difficult in black and white papers I've got in front of me, but yes, it is set out very well, very comprehensively, very easy to understand as well. Councillor Hockner, please.
Thank you. I've got a question about Anglia Square and the kind of the net impact of that. So the report says that the percentage of vacant units has increased, and that could be linked to Anglia Square redevelopment. But then if all of these businesses have relocated somewhere else and have taken up empty floor space somewhere else, empty units somewhere else, then it wouldn't necessarily have a negative impact on, or wouldn't have increased vacancy rates. I'm just wondering what the net impact is, and also how St Saviour's Yard comes into the picture, if it's there already. I also have a second question, but I can also wait for that.
Sarah might be able to help me out here, but my assumption is that St Saviour's is providing more for your smaller scale retailing, but Anglia Square has clearly lost some of those larger scale retail units it had, but they will be replaced in the redevelopment. So in the short term, we have a loss of larger scale units.
I also believe that the retail monitor was completed as Anglia Square's retail offer had closed, but the St Saviour's Yard hadn't yet opened. So that's not quite reflected, that transition in this monitor, because St Saviour's Yard hadn't opened fully.
Yeah, I guess the interesting question is whether businesses have had to close, on whether they've just relocated. But I don't know if you have that data.
I don't think all the businesses have relocated. I think some have. They may not have gone into vacant units. Landlords may have chosen to move somebody else on and somebody go in somewhere. It's constantly moving. So I think this is a snapshot in time. So I wouldn't hang too much on specifics at the point that this was done. I think there's a huge positive to look at this. St Saviour's Yard is a massive success. And I think Charlotte's right that the monitoring was done before that was open, but that will be reflected next year. And actually what it's highlighted both to the planning team and the economic development team, is that there's a huge need there for that type of unit. So I know we're actively considering where else we can offer that type of unit for kind of small startup businesses, which is a massive positive and something we need to be looking to do, because there are still vacancies. But I think, yeah, that the loss of all the Anglia Square stuff has probably shown as a big hit. But for example, some of those larger scale premises won't have gone into kind of smaller units. So it'll be the small ones kind of moving around. So it will look like a bigger loss.
Okay, thank you. Any follow-ups to that? Any further questions on this? Okay, Councillor Lubbock first, and then Councillor Padder.
Just very briefly, in paragraph 8, you say the checking out report has highlighted sort of really the fundamental issue of that we used to look at the high street as it was, and now we're looking at the income that determines whether or not there's any money to spend on the high street, and going into detail about what the city centre can do, the city council can do to improve the city centre, and how it must look to attract more visitors, and look to see how it can do that. And of course, we are lucky, at least we do have a city that does have a lot of visitors, and we can improve on that, whereas some cities, you know, just don't have that strength. But I do think when we become a unitary authority, we can do much better than we're doing at the moment in terms of making Norwich more attractive to visitors, especially those that might come on a daily basis just by coach, and making it coach friendly. At the moment, there is a bit of work that sits with the county council, because they're the highways authority, and it's a way of making Norwich coach friendly. But it has to be done by the county council, and I'm not sure that their heart's in it, and it will be done in the next year or two. But once we are the unitary authority, we can do that work and make sure that we are on the on the mind of coach companies, and that do start, you know, offering people, certainly from sort of Essex and other places, that could be done in a, you know, you can travel in a day from, to make Norwich more, have more visitors, day visitors. But I just thought that, you know, we are in a state of flux, and we've got a lot going for us, but we don't hold all the cards, but we might, we might in the near future.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to respond to that?
No, it's just a comment, really.
Just a comment, yeah.
I agree. I think we could do. I think we could do more on short breaks, tourism visits, tourists from people come up from London for 2 or 3 days. I think we could do more on that. I don't see that much advertising of what is the finest medieval city in the country. Don't hear that said so often these days. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And we look on the graph, or the figure on page 343, and you can see that Cambridge, Oxford, and York all similar in terms of their historic offer, are right up the in the favourable end of the table, which is a target for us, isn't it? I think. Okay, thank you. Councillor Padder, please.
Yeah, it just really builds on the conversation we've just had. It really is about tracking some of the small businesses. So there's 80, for example, there's 80 containers at the Box Park, and then there were 400 EOIs. So there'll be 320, I assume, small businesses that, you know, they'll be looking for other premises. So, you know, reflecting on all of the national issues with small businesses struggling with business rates. Are there opportunities in the city centre to potentially pause on business rates? So some of the independent sector or small businesses could kind of establish some roots and then grow from grassroots up, and then, you know, draw some more business into the city and opportunities. And, you know, I think there's probably a big conversation to have around some of the small businesses. I think the start would be to track what is going on with small businesses in Norwich. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, the City Council does have leeway with quite a bit of leeway actually with business rates, and can offer incentives to small businesses to help them set up and build. So yeah, another good point. Anyone else, please? Councillor Hockner.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw there was mention that Norwich is going to commission a city centre investment prospectus, and I wanted to know what that was about and what the timescales are in the scope.
Yeah, I think that piece of work is being led by John East as interim director of the major projects team. So it's basically to kind of, dare I say it, kind of showcase what's available in Norwich and how we can, you know, support businesses and support development. But I'm sure that would be something that John will be bringing through kind of councils and cabinet, etc. in due course when it's further developed. It's very, very infancy stages at the present time. So.
Okay, thank you. Anything else before we draw it to a close? Okay, that's perhaps I'll just have just one question. Perhaps in my role as a ward councillor for Mancroft, I think I should mention the market. I wondered if you could give us an update on the market and the development that's proposed there. Is there something that you could do, Sarah?
I'm not sufficiently close enough to it, but I can certainly ask John East if he could potentially provide an update to SD panel on it.
It would be good to have an update, and personally I'd like to have a briefing. Thank you. Okay, right, unless there's anything else, we'll draw the meeting to a close with thanks to everyone. Okay, yeah, please, Sarah.
I did take the liberty of Teams messaging Oliver Ferber, the interim head of environment services, just on the recycling issue. So there's a number of things that we're doing as a city council. He says there's been a combination of issues. There's obviously the changing nature of packaging and what is and isn't accepted, but also a lot of companies these days are doing what they're calling light weighting of packages. So 10 years ago, a cardboard box would weigh more than it does now. So that obviously will affect our tonnages effectively. He also says kind of participation levels are declining and food waste particularly has seen a reduction in tonnages, but we're working on the rollout of 7,000 new food waste collections across the city, which are due to start the end of June, start of July. So we are kind of actively trying to kind of target additional food waste collections. That we're also going to be doing some more education and promotion around waste and recycling services which are available to residents. So some of those comms messages will be going out from July onwards. Garden waste tonnages took a decline last year, which is probably due to the hot summer. So people obviously weren't needing to cut grass so much. And all of that kind of goes into, you know, reduced weights effectively going through. Contamination is still definitely an ongoing concern. So they're using data at the moment, or gathering data at the moment, on the most contaminated collection routes so that we can target some of those kind of communications to residents about what can and can't go in. So we're actually hitting the areas where it's a real problem. And then kind of also kind of conversely, we're extending our enforcement officer roles to look further into fly tipping, contamination and some of those behavioural change projects alongside housing colleagues and businesses across the city. So there is a huge amount going on, not in the planning team, but in the environmental services team. But I hope that gives you a bit of comfort that we are thinking about it, aware of it, and definitely taking some steps forward. Thank you.
Thank you for the very prompt update. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you. So that brings the meeting to a close. Thanks again to everybody and for the reports and the presentation.